Anthropology. Anthropology was able to free itself of the curse laid on it by evil fairies at the time of its birth. Today, it has rid itself of a form of intellectual asceticism embodied, or rather disembodied, in the work of Claude Lévi-Strauss. The amateur intellectualism of analysis reduced ontological realities to nomenclatures, to words, and abstract relationships among concepts. The mental absorbed the social, and with it the historical, time, into an abstract space of forms and structures. This scientificity covered a series of illicit operations, carefully dissimulated within the envelope of structuralism. First, beneath the appearance of recognizing the specificity of the realities under consideration, so-called archaic societies, it submitted their differences to the categories of the Occidental logos. The destructive activity of European reason, theoretically negative, practically devouring whatever resisted it, was revivified and now justified. Intellectual reductivism completed the reduction begun by other means, claiming to compensate for earlier disasters. Second, anthropology sidestepped modernity. It appeared to indirectly approach the study of the contemporary world, but in actuality, it deflected critical lucidity by circumventing objective realities. By discovering primitive categories, family, exchange, in the contemporary world, it succeeded in erasing capitalism, the bourgeoisie, imperialism. Its ideological clumsiness is such that countless ingenuous souls, believing themselves to be part of an avant-garde, took this attitude as a sign of boldness, others as a sign of subversion. But in actuality, it was no more than an enormous circle, the most vicious of all. We conceive of others as a function of the self, and we conceive of the self in terms of others, holding to a conception of the self that is reduced to the absolute minimum. The attack against structuralism, a reactionary ideology in the service of a neo-capitalist technocracy, was initially conducted on a general, theoretical, and methodological front. This ideology retained a degree of strength and appeal, which had been established on what was thought to be solid ground: anthropology. Today, dislodged from the epistemological center it assumed it had strengthened, this ideology is threatened on its own terrain. Robert Jaulin discovered a connection between A. Logical relations of inclusion and exclusion, B. Spatial relations of interiority and exteriority, and C. Affective relations of belonging or not belonging to the same group. The relation of the self to the self and to other selves is inclusive, reflexive, spatially and effectively interiorizing. The relation to groups of others is exclusive, exteriorizing, and tends toward indifference and hostility. This overview doesn't explain anything, however. It only enables us to address the study of populations, the Bari and Sara people, for example, in order to identify affective differences. The fundamental social unit is defined by the connection, the intersection, between the people of the self and the people of the other. A society, a civilization, experiences an everydayness. However, this everydayness does not consist of a vocabulary, but of acts and usages that govern space and places of resistance, productive efforts and the pleasures of consumption, skill, and social behavior, the joys and sorrows of love, marriage, and procreation. In this way, space enters the thought that describes and analyzes societies unlike our own, and this confirms its formation as a social space in societies described by history and the other social sciences, not only ethnology and anthropology. Relationships remained without support for knowledge. The relations described and analyzed by Jaulin involve groups that are effectively excluded by their inclusion, and are distinguished and differentiated from one another in a determinate space. Social units correspond, although loosely, to residences, collective homes, quarters, in such a way that society can be described in terms of its structures of production or marriage without inconsistency, although the connections are by no means mechanical, because there are always choices, preferences, areas of uncertainty. As a result, the knot of relations is not attached to contemporary vocabulary, to the terminology of relations. Nomenclature doesn't have the privileged role given to it by linguistic dogmatism, for which relations and words coincide, as if words pointed to things. The proper name, left out by formalist linguistics, is a term, a knot of relations, that designates the relations between a person and those who call him by that name. Charles, Robert, Henri. This leads outside formalism to the search for those in question and their interrelations. These interrelations include residences and the distribution or attribution of space, consumption and production, primarily of food. With spaces and names, sexuality re-enters anthropology, not in terms of the sexuality of orgasm alone or reproduction, which no description could ignore, but concrete sexuality, the kind that requires a place and a partner. Opportunity and preference, in short, to parody advertising rhetoric. A personalized sexuality, which accepts, or rejects, commitment and marriage. The space of a house, the surrounding grounds, a garden, a path, fields, trees, signifies femininity, mother or wife. With marriage, the young man leaves the maternal space for that of his wife. He leaves his mother. The child's first space is the mother's womb, the second the mother and her space. So that, among the three terms, woman, house, earth, a proximity is established that is simultaneously perceptible and symbolic. A wife, then, is another woman, another house, another land. The wife is a mother, modified by the departure from the space of the house, the womb of the house. This creates the link between marriage, sexuality, and spatial and social organization. The space associated with the wife, the house, her territory, will be, like that associated with the mother, bound to her class, which is to say, to the classification that defines the world of the marriage in the social unit. In other words, in a society bound to the earth by production and consumption, food, the sexual relationship, culminating, sometimes, in marriage, involves two persons, each of whom is bound to a house, a land, and relatives. The site itself of the marriage is associated with a reciprocal transition from kinship to marriage, from one group of relatives to a related group through consanguinal or collateral relations. The person, bearing a proper name, is not an abstract individuality, outside space, someone who is involved in social relationships and embodies them materially. It is not enough to simply introduce some vague localization of social relationships. The partitioning of space is as fundamental and structural as that of time. As for nomenclature and naming system, it is not based on filiation alone, but on spatial operations. The terms affinity and consanguinity have a spatial connotation. A distance in space, as in sexual evaluation generally, separates those who can marry, or have an affair, from those who cannot. The prohibition consists in this distancing itself. The defense consists in the fact that, for thought and gesture, there are so many intermediaries that the infringement, the transgression, cannot be conceived or imagined. This twofold distance, real and abstract, spatial and mental, separates the people assimilated here, relatives and others, those whom an act can include in the first group and those who are forever excluded. Space acts socially as a support for relations in general, production, consumption in a society where people live off the products of the soil, and in particular, sexual relations. These may be prohibited because of proximity, vicinage, or immediacy. Possible through mediation, impossible because of distance or the absence of relations. This has several consequences. Space does not represent a place, or a group of places, marked by indifference. A site that either falls short of effective relations, together with natural space, or one that lies outside it, such as the abstract space of reflection, mathematics, and philosophy. Social space is impregnated with affectivity, sexuality, desire, and repulsion. The affections are not content to enhance objects seen in isolation, to become invested and crystallize on beings. Relationships are impregnated, and consequently, so is their support, space. Affective colorations are not applied to space like a coat of paint, however. Space is terrifying or affirming, loved or feared, preferred or rejected. Affective distances are not separated by mental, social, or spatial distances. They are not arranged in terms of geometric or spatial structures, circles radiating out from a subjective center, quadrangular or other shapes, or as arbitrary projections endowing things with significations here and there as a result of accident or chance. A relative and approximate correspondence, but one sufficiently precise to orient gestures and acts, is established between these levels and aspects: logic, everyday life, sentiments. Examples can be found in the tents of the Turkmens, described by ethnologists such as Cuisenier, Tarade, and Olivier Marc as the dwellings of the semi-nomadic peoples who live in yurts, animal skin tents that are still found in the suburbs of Ulaanbaatar, Outer Mongolia, and in Anatolia, Turkey, and among Uzbek, Kazakh, and Kyrgyz herders in the Soviet republics. The topak ev, a large circular tent, should not be confused with the kara chadir. The latter, which is black and made of goatskin, is used to shelter men, chiefs, and warriors. The topak ev, by contrast, made of light-colored felt, is used to house the women of the tribe, who also construct the dwelling. The women's yurt, a closed world, round, reproduces the entire cosmos. The shamans teach that the sky is a dome made of stretched sewn skins. And the yurt, topak ev, is itself a microcosm. A circular roof represents the sky. There is a hole in the center of the roof to let smoke out and allow the favorable influx from the sky to enter the home, where the woman resides. Wife, mother, supreme good, burden, and joy. The house is a womb, the site of a twofold birth, a physical birth and a social birth, following which the male child will go live with the men until he finds a wife and a new female house. Everything has a meaning. The sewing of the skins, the fringes that terminate the edges of the skins or embellish the seams. Fringes and seams are the vehicles of magical interventions, celestial influxes. Ethnologists suggest that the fringes symbolize the wounds of womanhood, the blood of deflowering, or a mythical childbirth, for they are sometimes arranged around lunar circles. Woven with care, the fringes bring about joy and enjoyment for the woman who maintains the yurt. The yurt is oriented towards the east. The woman, night and day, always faces west. Her oldest son has the best place, to the right of his mother, and therefore facing east, the source of joy and clarity. This is where the woman remains. She has her own domain, which encloses her completely, even though the yurt can be disassembled and transported easily. The yurt is the woman's place, while active, commercial, and military life takes place outside, beneath the awnings or upturned flaps of the kara chadir, the male tent. The woman maintains her household utensils and clothing in the topak ev. It is here that she prepares meals, receives her friends, takes care of the children, sleeps. The married man has nothing of his own. He only sees his wife at night, in the unlit yurt. For the young girl, her mother's tent is an inviolable fortress, where, whenever she is so inclined, she invites a fiancé, secretly. A young girl will spend her adolescence preparing a yurt. She makes the felt, knots the rugs, embroiders curtains, weaves the strips of cloth, and braids the fringes. The husband will provide the skins and erect the tent. This microcosm protects and encloses the women, a source of wealth and well-being, a recipient of life's benefits. The wife never leaves it. The tent simulates the cosmos and functions as a prison of femininity. The yurt, in a way that is both symbolic and concrete, practical, plays a generative role. It is here that social life is produced and reproduced, unchanging, immutable. It partially embodies the connection between worlds, that of the mother and father, and that of the wife, that of the men and the cosmos. The husband, symbolically, abducts the wife and transports her to his territory, but he must provide her, assisted by her own efforts and those of her father, who furnishes wool and silk, with a home that is as beautiful as possible, depending on the rank and wealth of the family. A home he will enter only when invited. This list summarizes the space of the yurt and is based on the work of Olivier and Marc. Topak Ev, mobile, nomadic, round, cupola, felt, sheep's wool, silk, fecundity, comfort, happiness. Karachadir, stable, tendency towards sedentariness, angular and often triangular, tendency to use durable construction materials, bricks, solidity, tendency to asceticism. The plurality of symbols, the organization of daily life, affectivity, sensuality, even eroticism, cannot be separated from practice, and in this way, meaning is generated. The male and female principles, without being isolated, are distinct and combined spatially. Symbolism is attached both to the materials employed and to the spatial forms and structure of social space. It is even a component of construction methods, techniques of fabrication, use of materials. Love and passion in the landscape of the yurts have their tragic moment as well, when the fiancé carries off his bride-to-be from the paternal home and rides with her on horseback to the space where he will be born anew, this time as a warrior shepherd during his third birth, through the woman he has deflowered, through his mother and spouse. But the space of the yurt normalizes the drama of love. There is nothing indifferent about this space, but although everything has a meaning and becomes part of a total meaning, nothing can be reduced to a sign, to the abstraction of a sign thing. Although we cannot draw a utopian model, a proposal, a primitivist utopia from such a profoundly enhanced space, we can learn something. What about the space of enjoyment? Sensuality, viewed independently, can be inscribed in a place. Disreputable neighborhoods, whorehouses, bordellos, a localized and therefore functionalized sensuality, with a price tag attached, devoid of gratuitousness and grace, destroys itself. The space of enjoyment cannot provide a ready-made, consumable form of enjoyment. And consequently, neither can it provide the utopia of a productivity of enjoyment. Do enjoyment, joy, sensuality consist in the eradication of space and time? Would a space impregnated with affectivity tend toward hyperspace? The other, the beloved, being in death, sensuality abandoning the real for annihilation. This tragic vision of enjoyment disdains social space. The superhuman moment avails itself fully of its position. In it, everything that social space has separated from nature is reunited in the supreme, absolute, and final moment. But nothing can be said of this tragic moment. What can we build upon such an unreliable foundation, on this dream? Nothing, not even a utopia. The Mongol yurt offers the image of a social space that is normal and yet made for the development of the human being. But this development is limited for both the woman, who is a prisoner, and the man, who is thrust into an outside existence with his flock and seeks stability as compensation, far more than the woman, who transports her microcosm with her. A simple but distant example, all of which takes place within the scope of history, in the immediacy and reciprocal presence of the cosmos, of spontaneous life, in the already precise organization of time and daily life.